Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the session today on remembering our living relationship with plants. We're very grateful and honored to have two excellent speakers today, um, David Kopacz, MD, and Karen Kopacz. David Kopacz is a psychiatrist with the Seattle Veterans Affairs, a national education champion with the VA Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation, and an assistant professor at the University of Washington. He is author of Rehumanizing Medicine. Over the last 7 years, David has been working with Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, and they have co-authored Walking the Medicine Wheel, Healing Trauma and PTSD, and Becoming Medicine, Pathways of Initiation into a Living Spirituality. Karen Kopacz is a designer, artist, and writer living in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. She is currently working on an artist-led project that elevates stories about land, water, and our relationships to land and each other. This series features ink drawings that pair with stories about the ecological importance of natural protected areas. So David Kopacz will speak first, then he will present the video, and then Karen Kopacz will speak. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just share my screen here and get to the slide deck. There we go. Get to the beginning. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks for joining us all today. As Paul mentioned, we're going to have a structure where I'll do a presentation. We'll present a video that Karen and I worked on with Joseph Rael, and then my sister Karen will present her part of the presentation. So I'm going to speak on toward an ancient way of being with plants. And I'm drawing on my work with Joseph Rael. You can see one of his paintings here to the left. While our conference is called Toward a New Way of Being with Plants, we're going to look at an old and even ancient way of connecting and relating and being with plants. Joseph is he was born on the Southern Ute Reservation. He's enrolled in the Southern Ute tribe through his mother's people, but he grew up mainly at Pickery's Pueblo down in north central New Mexico with his father's people. And his Tiwa name, the language of Pickery's Pueblo, translates as beautiful painted arrow. And so Joseph is an artist and a healer and a peace activist. He's done a lot of different work over the years, written a number of books. He's 86 years old this year, and he's retired from public speaking. So his presence will be through some of the artwork that we feature and then the video that we made. My own ancestors and Karen's ancestors came from Poland, Wales, the UK, and Europe. And as you can see in Joseph's paintings here, there's a livingness in everything and aliveness everywhere. The clouds are alive, the thunder's alive, the sky is alive, the earth is alive, the corn plant is alive. And so one of the things to look at as we speak today is how we relate to plants as living beings, and really the whole earth as a living being. So here's a photo of Joseph and I. Karen took this when we shot the video back in 2018. And Joseph and I met about 7 years ago. And I've told the story of how we've met several different times in our writing. And yet in many ways, the story is inexhaustible and can be told again and again. And each time something new can be gained from it. Since we have just a short time today, I'll give you a brief version of the story. As I was working as a VA psychiatrist, working with, trying to help veterans come home from war to peace, and using Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey model. And a chance email connected me with Joseph Rael, and he invited me down to the Southern Ute Reservation in Durango, Colorado, and we spent 3 days together. I thought I would maybe write a chapter on this workbook for veterans, but after the first day, I was looking at my notes and I was like, there is so much here. And I met with Joseph the next day for breakfast and said, it seems like there's a whole book here. And he said, well, that's what I'm thinking too. But he just said it so matter of fact, like it was no big deal. And so that's how we started working together. And from the Tiwa perspective, his grandparents would often say work is worship. So we've been doing this work together that's resulted in these 2 books, Walking the Medicine Wheel and also Becoming Medicine. And we've got a third book coming out soon that's going to be on Joseph's life and lessons. So let me look at some of Joseph's art here and talk with you a little bit about Joseph's art. So again, you can see everything is alive. He often would get sent by the elders at Picquary's Pueblo to harvest the herbs and plant medicines that they needed for their ceremonies. And Joseph said he would know which herbs to pick because the herbs would speak to him. And sometimes he would say it was the spirit of the plants, and sometimes he would say it was the plant fairies. So on the left, you can see the rain calling the plant fairies, the little humanoid figures there are sort of dancing there with the plants. In the center picture, you can see how the plants and the flowers themselves are alive and they're seeking the light. And on the right, you can see how the smoke from the sage smudge manifests as Sage Woman. And she's there kind of covered with rainbows and helping to purify things through the sage smudge. So again, everything for Joseph has a quality of livingness and aliveness. And through practice, we can develop a way of relating to plants. So now I'm going to read to you a passage from our book, Becoming Medicine, about what Joseph called a tree spirit initiation. So this took place on September 10th, 2015, and Joseph had me wake up in the middle of the night. I was staying in a hotel in Durango, and I drove through the dark roads out further and further into the country, onto the Southern Ute Reservation, onto the earth roads out there. They weren't paved roads, and it was completely dark and no street lights. So I was trying to find my way there in this. I'd been there already several times, but trying to find my way there in this new kind of mode of darkness. And so I got there and we got into Joseph's pickup truck. He drove it over and pointed it towards the river. And we waited for moonrise to come up. So I'll just read you a little bit from the book. So we started the day at 4 a.m. to watch moonrise and watch for tree spirits. Joseph instructed me to slit my eyes and not to blink. It's like prolonged camera exposure, he said. The sky was magnificent, with the Milky Way and stars everywhere. We sat in his truck, and right away I started to see something. It's kind of like imagination and letting the mind wander, but it was definitely a formed image, and it didn't feel like make-believe. I saw a pale, glowing figure, wispy, moving in a dance, and I heard in my imagination a chant, "Hey away, hey away." And the figure was very supple and swaying and bending as it danced, and gradually this elaborated more, and I was surprised to feel the spirit rush toward me and even through the truck to grab me and to pull me onto the dance floor, so to speak. And part of the surprise was I expected the tree spirits to be, kind of encapsulated within the trees, but they were roaming around with the tree as a central point. I felt this pull of the invitation to dance several times. The pull and desire for me to join in the dancing, which I did through my imagination, not through my physical body, but eventually I did sort of yield and say, okay, well, I'll let myself and my imagination go out and join the dance. And Joseph had kind of told me ahead of time, they are as curious about us as we are about them. So the dance further elaborated, and I suddenly became aware of the whole field of tree spirits dancing in unison, not just one tree spirit from one tree. And sometimes they would go in opposite linear directions in synchrony. And it was this beautiful image that made me sigh and relax into my seat. I became aware that the spirits were dancing not just on the surface of the ground, but below the ground as well. And at some point I felt pulled below the surface, and I got somewhat scared because I was peering up at the light of the stars, but also through the added darkness of the earth. And I can't be certain of what I saw, as I was kind of coming in and out a few times. I'd sort of lose focus trying to see the image, but also working with my fear of being pulled into the underground. So the next elaboration of the dance was a sense of a three-dimensional globe that formed, encircling the entire tree from the branches all the way down to the roots, half of it above ground, half of it below ground. And then these whole globes moved in alternating backwards and forwards and side-to-side linear movements, with that chant again of "Hey away, hey away," and then the chant would change with a circular movement of "Laka, laka, 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 laka," and then it would go "Hey away, hey away." So then I had an image of like pulling back, zooming out a little bit more, of seeing the whole line along the trees dancing in the darkness, dancing and chanting for the coming of the moon. And then this moved even further, where I could see the entire globe and see the sort of the line of the light of the moon sweeping across the entire globe. And from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, seeing this dance of the awakening of the tree spirits in the nighttime with the coming of the moon. So eventually the moon did rise, you know, and I saw this sliver, just a crescent, accompanied by a bright companion star off to the upper right. And I noticed once the moon rose, the chant changed slightly. Hey, oh, way, oh, hey, oh, way, oh. And so, but the dancing continued. And, you know, this may all sound quite fantastic. And as a psychiatrist, you know, I had to admit, I thought once, twice, three times, should I, you know, write about this? Should I talk about this in an international conference as a psychiatrist? So I started thinking, and I read a lot about, like, you know, Carl Jung's idea of visions and active imagination, and Henry Corbin's idea of the creative imagination, trying to understand from a Western perspective how we could look at visions as a form of reality rather than a form of fantasy or delusion. So I would say the difference between a vision and hallucination is that if I opened my eyes all the way, the images would disappear. I had to concentrate and focus and squint my eyes to see what I could see. So Joseph would call this a shift between ordinary reality and what he calls non-ordinary reality or visionary reality. So a lot of his ceremonies are involved in helping us to shift from ordinary to non-ordinary reality, to see the world in this different way. And so to see the plant spirits, you know, I had to work to shift into non-ordinary reality. And it's also much easier to do this, you know, sitting side by side with Joseph and having his focus and concentration. So I'll just read one more paragraph here. So after moonrise, Joseph said to me, okay, now ask them a question. They are in agreement with what we're doing in the book, and ask them now for advice on how to proceed. And what grew in my imagination was a view of the interaction of the hard work of the roots, the hard work of our book writing, these roots growing into the ground, and the joyousness of the branches waving in carefree celebration. It seemed to me that the work of the roots was the intentional writing with the book. All my years of background reading, the intentional focus of you know, this time sitting, looking at the trees. The roots were the effort. The branches with the leaves and flowers were radiant and carefree celebration. I had the sense that the harder I worked, the deeper the roots would go, but also the higher the branches would go, and the more they would flower and fruit. So that's a little bit of, you know, my work with Joseph and some of my experiences that I've had. Let's go to the next slide here. There we go. So machle. Machle is the word for the number 6, and also chle means grass and ancient wisdom. So it means several different things. So Joseph told me one time, with talking about chle and ancient wisdom and grass, that people are so obsessed with their lawns because they're trying to reach ancient wisdom, but they don't know how. They don't really know how to reach it. And so they're connecting with the superficial aspect of the grass, but they're not going into the roots of the grass to connect to ancient wisdom. And so he suggested that, you know, instead of people trying to spend so much time manicuring their lawn, they should just go into relationship with the ancient wisdom of that grass. So overall, you know, what I'd say is what Joseph's teaching me is this shift to a different way of paying attention, of looking and seeing and being. And this is what an initiation is. It's an awakening to a new way of being with plants and with ourselves. But actually, this new way is an old way, an ancient way of learning from plants. And so at first I was surprised with the tree spirits. It seemed like they were singing and dancing in a manner similar to indigenous people. And then I realized it wasn't a coincidence that indigenous people have been learning for eons from our plant relatives and our animal relatives the ways of the world and the ancient wisdom. So just as generations of indigenous people have learned from plants and learned from nature, we too can turn with a proper mindset and relation to learn from plants as well, to learn this ancient wisdom. So now I'd like to play a video that Karen and I made of Joseph. Karen did the photography and the producing and everything, and you'll hear Joseph speak. If, you know, because of the technology, if you have a hard time hearing this, I put a link there to my website, which also has the video, and you can listen to it through the website, hopefully without any technical problems. So now let's listen to this. It's about a 5-6 minute video.
When we are born, at the moment that we are no longer in the womb, but we're outside of the womb, they used to put us on the floor, the babies on the floor, because that would be the number one number. And from then on, any activities that took place around the birth moment would be 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. The 4 is we. That means to give. That's when the midwife gives the child to the mother to hold. That's we. And then Pannu is when that energy then goes not only to the mother but also to the rest of the people who may be gathered to be there with the birthing of the child. And then it goes into the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th levels of life. And then, of course, then it continues 11, 12, 13, or 14, or 15, and they go on. And during those moments, the child eventually becomes a year. So that would be like 1, and then when it's 2 years old, then it would be a 2, and then a 3, and then a 4, and a 5, and a 6, and a 7, 8, 9, and 10, and they're 10 years old. And then you come back and repeat that 10 times, is much, much older. In between those times, we were taught about the corn ceremonies, the deer ceremonies, the elk ceremonies, the fire ceremonies, the war dance ceremonies, being in vibration areas that were available to all the human beings. And so that becoming medicine is what helps the person who is going to become a medicine man. That's the powers. All of those powers focus on that individual, no matter where they're at, anywhere on planet Earth, that helps them to refine their power to heal people. Shle means ancient. Shle means ancient. Goes around the wheel of the human. As he's becoming more and more human, and then he comes again to the Ancient One with the blessing of the Ancient One, and then he goes up and becomes the shadow of where he has been, and then he comes again, and the Ancient One blesses him as he goes round and round the center for many, many, many lifetimes, until finally, after he has finished all of the ancient connections of his being, is gone, and then he becomes pure energy and pure light, and then all we see is a shadow as a true human being, for he has been initiated by the Ancient One. Say,
Okay, so you can see in this video, we didn't go anywhere special. This was just Joseph's yard, and we walked out into his yard, and he did this ceremony of connecting to the Ancient One through the grass growing in his yard, and through bringing a certain way of being and seeing. So before I hand it off to my sister, I'd like to just say it's no coincidence that Karen and I both are here speaking on a conference toward a new way of being with plants, because we grew up with our mom, Linda Kopacz, who is a master gardener now, and we were just completely surrounded by plants growing up, inside and outside. Plants were always everywhere, little baby plants in jars and water and sprouts, and so plants have been around us all this time, and we'd like to honor the plants, and I'll hand this over to Karen.
Thanks, Dave. I am Karen Kopacz, and I am an artist, writer, and designer living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on Dakota and Anishinaabe Ojibwe land. And I was invited to collaborate with Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, and my brother David Kopacz to film the ceremony and the video. I'll be speaking about the film and also my own art and book writing project to demonstrate some examples of shifting into a relational mindset with plants and nature, and the practice of slowing down and shifting language.
It's coming through kind of quiet for me. Paul, is it quiet for you?
Yeah, right, it is. And it's
very...
not coming on the full screen. I'm wondering if it might be possible to talk a little bit louder or something, or turn up the volume.
Volume is maxed. I'll speak a little bit louder. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to share my screen now, and we can look at the slide deck here. Whoops. Okay. So I was invited to film with Joseph Rael a couple of times, and what I consistently notice is an intentional slowing down hours before the ceremony begins. We share meals together, and Joseph shares stories, and this sets the tone for the intentionality of the ceremony. And during the ceremonies, I've seen Joseph include soil and grasses, as we've just seen in the last video, the universe or whatever is alive around him. One ceremony we were doing, or he was doing, and I was filming, he included an airplane that happened to be flying overhead. So we thought this was a little bit humorous, but there are people in the plane, and so he really is including everything alive that's around. And so we're witnessing reciprocity. Joseph is connecting to nature and the living environment, and he's honoring it. In the video editing process, I'm incorporating mountains and grasses and natural places in the area to set place, but also as a tool to slow things down and to prepare the audience to focus their attention. This photo is taken right after we filmed, and I wanted to show it because even though we're experiencing a lot of serious moments when we're collaborating, we also laugh a lot. And we need laughter and joy to connect to our humanity, especially as we are challenged to solve difficult situations that we face in forwarding equity and climate crisis solutions. So we need humanity to connect with people, plants, and nature. And these are some of my drawings. I'm interested in exploring the practice of telling stories through art and slowing down to create tension between my life and fast-paced culture. I'll be talking about some practices that I use to shift my own mindset in art and writing, and it's called a practice because I have to keep trying. Often our culture does not support the value of slowing down. Each of these drawings tells a unique story. So I use art to elevate stories, to draw people in to learning about the unique qualities of these natural areas and their impacts and their healthy systems, and to contemplate the relationships between people, land, and water. I deepened my connection to these places by visiting them. And I traveled 8,000 miles in several trips to each state throughout the Midwest to go and see these places firsthand. I often traveled and camped alone, and this allowed me to be really quiet with these places and experience the different ecosystems deeply. So, for example, in the thick forests of southern Illinois, I was trying to fall asleep in my tent, but there was a cacophony of insects, and it was quite loud and pretty difficult to sleep. Whereas in the prairies of Nebraska, it was much more quiet, and except for maybe some cows in the distance and a horse that visited me at night near my tent. So my relationship with each place evolved through being there and talking with local people, and also driving to them and seeing how each environment connects to the next. I realized I wasn't just going to a park, I was seeing how the landscapes shift and relate. And this really affected my project. This drawing is of the tallgrass prairie in the National Preserve in Kansas, and it depicts a burn area which reveals the rocky landscape beneath the grasses that were there before. The deep root system of the tallgrass prairie creates rich soil, and during settlement, prairies were cleared for farming. The rocky soil in this region prevented farmers from plowing, and this large expanse of prairie was preserved by coincidence. So the mindset of acting before we understand impacts or despite it is still embedded in our culture. And this is just one story that can be used as an example to shift narrative. Instead of preserving a traditional history about settlement and telling the prairie's story. So the tallgrass prairie is one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world. Less than 4% of 170 million acres in North America still is here of the tallgrass prairie, and of high quality prairies and savannas, less than 1/100th of 1% in the Corn Belt states. In this work, it's important to me to bring attention to taking care of the living world and to tell these stories in a way that draws attention to how we perceive ecosystems and relationships. And I'm using shifting language as a way to help shift perspective. So an example of this is as I was working on the book that I'm currently still working on, I was using the term our land or the phrase our land to describe the land around us and was thinking of it as a way to connect us, a thing that we shared. But over time, I realized that we're not all having the same experience, and particularly with land. So it started to become divisive in my mind. And also, it's literally a possessive term. So I wanted to shift that to the land, which I did throughout my book. And I wanted to shift that attention to help us see the land as sovereign. And I learned this language shifting idea through an article I read from George Lakoff, who is a linguist. He wrote an article that talked about centering corporations when we use the term regulations. And when we use the term public protections, it centers people. So there's a really subtle shift in how we use language that can help us comprehend who it's really for. And then I'll just also note that I'm very grateful for the parks and state parks and national parks, and I think that preserving them is important. I also want to say that as I've been working on this project, I've started to see parks almost as an enclosed kind of people-focused system versus an ecology-focused system that reestablishes biological corridors and goes beyond the boundaries of the park. Another example is if we were to say plants, trees, water, and minerals are natural resources that we use as to sustain our way of life. This sounds like a fairly neutral statement and a common statement. However, if you really look at how those words are working together, it's framing it as a monetized commodity. Versus if we were to say plants, trees, water, and minerals are part of an ecosystem that nourish us, and we need to learn how to take care of them. Now we're framing it as a biotic community, a living community that we are part of. So language clarifies perception, perception motivates people, and people change policy. And this is why I think it's important to start with this very subtle shift in narrative. And how do we remember that our lives depend on creating cooperative relationships with the living world, especially when daily life seems to counteract the work that we do of slowing down and listening? So these are some ways that I notice healthy relationships are based on reciprocity. Healing our relationship with nature starts with returning to basics. When do you connect most deeply to shifting attention to the living world? These are questions that I ask myself also while I'm in that process of being quiet and slowing down. So is it when you're exploring new places or when you're close to home? And what is the closest natural space to your work or home? Do you remember a time in the past when you spent time quietly in nature? So for me, during the pandemic, one thing that I realized was that having recently moved to a new part of town, I didn't know where all of the natural spaces were, and I started to explore them, and I was surprised to find how many green spaces there are within walking distance of my house. And I also used maps to find, get an aerial view to see where the green spaces were as well. So those are a few things that you can explore. What practices can each of us develop to remember that we're part of the living world so that we can create new realities? How do we stop repeating destructive cycles with nature in new ways? And what does it look like to include nature and plants in my own learning process? What presumptions do I carry? Do I perceive science as static or as a process? And how do I perceive knowledge, and who discerns expertise? How can we expand leadership roles in the stewardship of natural systems? So these are all questions that I tune into, not only when I'm writing and not so much making art, but when I'm writing and then when I'm out connecting with nature as well. Incorporating the gift of intention into projects teaches me to reconnect with being quiet and listening to nature, which I vividly remember from my childhood growing up in rural Illinois. My way of connecting may be different than how someone else connects, so I'll just share some of my own practices and also ask questions to help prompt you to see how you might experience developing a deepened relationship with nature and the living environment around you. So practice slowing down. What calm activities can we participate in that encourage quiet listening and define the quality of how we give attention to the living world? Expanding time. How do we offer attention back to the living world in a hurry? Can you make a commitment to practice being present and expanding these connections? Deepening the relationship. Reconnecting to familiar natural places helps us perceive cycles and anomalies, which strengthens supportive instincts about trees and plants and habitat. And building community, sharing experiences and knowledge, participating in nature walks or cleanup events, creating collaborative working groups to learn more about local environment that supports you so that you can be better to support it. And by collaborative working groups, I don't necessarily mean anything too formal, although it could be, but just connecting with neighbors to go and clean up your storm drains, or connecting with friends to work together in the yard or in gardens. And I think that by doing this, this is where we learn from each other. These are opportunities to connect and grow and learn about different types of soil and invasive species and ways of sharing knowledge. So I'll end with a few photographs that I took on my trips to the natural places that I've drawn. And these are just some quiet moments that you'll experience here as I was able to slow down in these places. So thank you so much, everyone. What an amazing event this has been to participate in, and thank you to Joseph Rael and David for the work we've done together, and to Alice, Kate, and Paul for the technical assistance. If you want to share any thoughts or conversations or continue them, we can please get in touch with David or myself at our websites, which you can find through our bios. And you could also subscribe for updates about availability for my prints or my forthcoming book. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for participating today, and thanks to David and Karen for those wonderful presentations. We hope that people will follow through and learn more about Karen and David's important work. And thank you very much for watching today's video. So take care.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody.